This is a very famous TV dating show from the 1970s called The Dating Game. It's like any other cheesy early evening dating TV show, except on this particular show in 1978, the female contestant is about to make a very dangerous choice, because she's about to go on a date with an active serial killer. For those of us who were a little too young to remember this show, this is The Dating Game, an American TV game show with a very simple premise which is now so common it's a cliche. The girl sits and asks questions to 3 mystery suitors, at the end of which she will choose one of those suitors to go on a date with based on how charming their answers are. The creator of The Dating Game was a man named Chuck Barris, who wrote a memoir in 1984 in which he claimed to have been a CIA agent tasked with many assassinations all over the world, who used his status as a Hollywood executive producer as a cover persona, which is a fascinating claim. But this video isn't about him. It's about Bachelorette number 13 in 1978, Cheryl Bradshaw, who on this very PG, soft dating TV show chose contestant number 1. Who just so happened to be an active serial killer. Very little is known about Cheryl Bradshaw, as she decided to stay out of the public eye, which is probably one of the wisest decisions that she ever made. What we do know is that she was a drama teacher and hoped to become an actress. Her appearance on The Dating Game was an attempt to gain some level of familiarity with Los Angeles producers and hopefully get cast in other shows or movies. The Dating Game had been around for a while at this point, and it wasn't uncommon for memorable guests to pop up in the entertainment industry in other ways after being on the show. For example, Farrah Fawcett, Suzanne Summers, Tom Selleck, Lee Majors, Steve Martin, Andy Kaufman and Burt Reynolds were all contestants before they were famous. And if those names are not quite sexy enough or you're too young to know who they are, Arnold Schwarzenegger appeared in 1973 on the show before Pumping Iron and Conan made him a household name. So it was considered by some people in the industry at the time to be kind of a springboard for a career in entertainment. Now, Cheryl had been struggling to get noticed and had started to feel like her time was running out. So when the chance to appear on the show presented itself, she took it. How a serial killer ended up being on the show is a different, longer and significantly darker story. Some of the events of his story are pretty horrible and twisted in a variety of ways. And due to YouTube's community policies, I'll be toning down the descriptions a bit, but they're still pretty horrific. Consider this your warning. Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio to Mexican immigrant parents who were by all accounts very normal people. At the age of 9, Rodney's father disappeared back to Mexico, leaving the family with no father. But despite this, the family did okay and his mother took care of him and his 2 sisters. In 1954, they shuffled across the country to settle in Los Angeles, where his mother hoped opportunities for her and her kids would be more plentiful. In school, Rodney was always described as a rare combination of being both very academically smart and also very popular. His mum worked really hard to send him to various private schools, and he graduated with good grades and a good reputation. He was even on the yearbook planning committee. After high school, Rodney decided to join the army rather than go to college, and served as a clerk instead of a paratrooper, which is what he actually wanted to be. During his time in the army, various commanding officers reported him as being very manipulative, vindictive, and subordinate. And in 1964, the cracks in Rodney's personality began to appear as he went AWOL from the army and hitchhiked across the country to his mother's house, where the army eventually caught up with him and had a military psychiatrist evaluate him. He was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, and his IQ test revealed that his score was 135. There is a cliche of psychopaths being very smart and high academic achievers with above average social intelligence but very low social and personal empathy. Rodney is a perfect example of that. Shortly after, he was then discharged by the army and enrolled at the UCLA School of Arts. It was at the School of Arts that Alcala would create his public persona of aspiring photographer. Rodney chose this career specifically because it's not unusual for a photographer to constantly be meeting strangers, specifically girls and women. Most people don't even think of it as being an inherently dangerous act to pose for a photo or to assist someone in taking a photo. I'm pretty sure everybody watching this video, both male and female, has been asked by a total stranger at some point in their life to take a photo. An even smaller subset of us have been asked to pose for a photo by a stranger. There's even people on TikTok and YouTube right now whose entire social media profile is just taking photos of random strangers. It's a very disarming and seemingly harmless thing, which is exactly why Alcala chose it. On September 25th, a motorist drove past Alcala's car and witnessed him coaxing a young girl into his car. Thinking that it seemed suspicious, he followed Alcala to his home and watched as he then persuaded the girl into his apartment before calling the police to report it. Shortly after, the police entered the apartment to find 8-year-old Tally Shapiro lying on the floor, unconscious, blood pouring from both her head and between her legs. Alcala had already fled at that point, and so they decided to prioritize saving Shapiro rather than going on pursuit of Alcala. Over here. People always want to know, how did it happen? I saw her at a bus stop, and I thought she was perfect. I told her I was a friend of her parents, so that she would trust me. And then I took her to my apartment to see some poster on my wall because I told her that I was a famous photographer. And I opened the door and I let her go inside first. And as soon as she was inside, I cracked the back of her head wide open with a steel pipe. She was out cold immediately and fell to the floor like butchered meat, just waiting for me. After being found and revived by emergency services, an examination revealed that Alcala had also sexually assaulted her while she was unconscious. 8-year-old Tally would remain in a coma for over a month as a result of the attack. Police searched far and wide for Alcala and cast a wide net, but he wasn't found at that time. To evade capture, Alcala moved across the country to New York City, where he enrolled at NYU to study film. He would eventually be taught by another despicable human being, Roman Polanski, who was a guest lecturer there. Now using the name John Berger, he would be mostly quiet for months until a chance encounter with a TWA flight attendant named Cornelia Krilly would tempt his violent side again. Cornelia. She was number 2. I'd only been in New York for a couple of months when I saw Cornelia. I was coming home from film class and I saw her trying to move furniture into her apartment, trying and failing. It was obvious she needed help, so I offered. As we moved the sofa into the apartment, I'd maneuver it in a way that would push her into a tight space between the sofa and the wall. To make it look accidental, of course. And she laughed about it. She playfully giggled until I started walking toward her. And she realized she was trapped. Have you ever seen somebody's facial expression change in real time? Start as one emotion and just quickly transition into another? I have. There's a moment right before something bad happens, when people know that something bad is about to happen. There's a moment. When their expression just sinks. All the color drains and fades away. Their eyes get real wide and their body tenses into that fight or flight response. When I look into their panic-stricken eyes in that moment, I know what they're thinking. That's the exact moment. That's the exact time when they realize they fucked up. That moment, seeing that change of expression, that fear, that moment's better than any drug in the world. The second best moment is the moment when you first hit them. The first time you hit them, there's another moment. You see, up until that point, it's scary, but there's always that small voice in the back of their head that tells them it's just a joke. It's a misunderstanding. It's not serious. That moment when you first hit them, there's that shock. And they realize this is real. It's not a joke. They try to scream. They always do, but the shock, it steals their voice. They open their mouth, but nothing comes out. And that's how it was for Cornelia. When I hit her, she opened her mouth to scream, and it was like she was on mute. It was beautiful. I remember she was wearing these nice black stockings, and she begged me to stop as I slipped them off her legs. But that just made me want to do it more. And she cried. She had literal tears in her eyes as I slowly tied them around her neck. The 23-year-old was found strangled to death by her own nylon stockings in her new apartment. The bruising of ligature markings on her neck suggested that she had been strangled multiple times, leading police to believe that Alcala had strangled her to the point of passing out, only to then revive her so that he could torture her again and assault her some more. At the time, police had no suspects and no clue as to why she had been chosen and attacked. The fact her things hadn't been yet moved into place in her apartment led them to believe that the assailant had possibly noticed her moving in and offered to help and then murdered her. Autopsy revealed that she had also been sexually assaulted and bitten. While they had no suspects at the time, they did manage to lift a saliva sample from the body and took an imprint of the bite mark for records, hoping to later match it to someone in future. By this time, police in New York had begun looking for Alcala on request of the FBI, who had added him to their 10 most wanted list for his assault of Shapiro in California. They'd also begun to suspect that he could be responsible for a number of serial murders in the New York area from 1969 to 1971, but had no way to link him to the cases other than the fact that it was similar to his one known crime. Alcala himself had begun working as a camp counselor in New Hampshire Arts Camp, which is where two campers spotted him and recognized him from the FBI posters. A couple of weeks later, Alcala was then arrested and extradited back to California to stand trial for the assault of Shapiro. Alcala did have his day in court. Unfortunately, instead of standing trial for attempted murder, he was only charged with molestation of a minor, which back in 1971 was not a serious offence and carried a much shorter sentence. This happened because Shapiro's parents wouldn't allow her to testify against him, and so the prosecutor was unable to prove rape and attempted murder. Alcala was then found guilty and sentenced to 3 years. He was paroled after 34 months in 1974. Just 2 months after his release on parole, he was then arrested again. A victim named in court documents later as Julie J. was found by police in the company of Rodney. Both had been smoking marijuana. Julie was a real sweet girl. I offered her a ride to school from the bus stop and she hopped right in. She had that beautiful, youthful naivety that women her age have. It's really one of the best qualities a woman can have. Instead of taking her to school, I found a quiet spot on the highway where we could relax and get to know each other better. She was nervous at first. Who isn't on a first date, right? But she relaxed once we smoked a little pot together. And just as things were starting to get interesting, some highway cop tapped on the window. Upon questioning Julie, it was revealed that he had picked her up at the school bus stop, pretending to give her a ride to school. Instead, he took her to the highway, where he tried to force himself upon her after giving her some marijuana, which she took from him out of fear of what he might do if she didn't take it. That's when highway cops stopped to check on the car, and that's how Alcala was caught, and it probably saved Julie J's life. Julie J was just 13 years old. Alcala was then tried and convicted of parole violation and giving drugs to a minor. He served 2 years before being released early again on parole and being placed on the sex offenders register. Despite being on the sex offenders register and previously being a criminal who had fled the state on a plane, he was deemed to not be a flight risk and so totally fine to travel to New York by his parole officer when he was released in 1977. In the summer of 1977, 23-year-old orchestra conductor Ellen Jane Hoover went missing. Unusually for her, she failed to check in with friends and family for a few days, and they asked the police to go check on her. Upon entering her apartment, police found no evidence of a struggle or forced entry. They checked her appointment book and found that she had recently had a meeting with a photographer named John Berger. Upon interviewing friends, they mentioned that she had said that a photographer had been pressuring her to meet with him, and that she was probably a bit too mild-mannered to say no and very likely went to meet him. A couple of months later, based on an FBI tip that Alcala had used that alias before, the police then interviewed Alcala, who did admit under question that he had met Hoover, but nothing more. As the police didn't have a body, they were unable to charge Alcala with any crime, since they couldn't actually establish that a crime had even occurred. Alcala decided to take the hint from the increased police attention and then skip town, heading back to Los Angeles in late 1977. In early 1978, the police would uncover Hoover's remains buried near the Hudson River, in the same spot which another girl had said a fashion photographer had taken photos of her. When shown an image of Alcala, she identified him as the photographer. When he arrived back in Los Angeles, Alcala took a job as a typesetter at the Los Angeles Times newspaper. Now, I know at this point you must be having the same question I repeatedly had throughout this story. This dude is a convicted and registered violent sex offender. How does he keep getting access to all these different places filled with potential victims? Well, life as a police investigator was pretty different back then. It was before the use of DNA, the internet, and despite there being an FBI, there was still very little cross-state and cross-institutional cooperation. It was also before centralized digital record keeping as well, so it was pretty easy to move to a new state, get a fake ID, and start an entirely new life, even as a multiple convicted felon. This happens a lot less these days precisely because we cooperate across states, agencies, and even countries, and keep centralized databases, which makes it much more difficult for a criminal to just change identity and disappear. There was also back then a much more common habit of trusting your judgment on someone's character, something which people with psychopathic tendencies are very good at manipulating. So when Rodney turned up at the LA Times regaling people with his stories and photos of shooting beautiful women as a popular photographer, people took him at face value. Nobody bothered to check if he was a criminal because he seemed like such a personable guy. 1977 seemed to be a bad year to be a woman in general in Los Angeles, as in addition to Rodney stalking the streets at night, the police were also searching for the Hillside Strangler, a serial killer who had habits of snatching women, sexually assaulting them, and strangling them to death. In fact, during the 1970s, there were as many as 20 serial killers, all active at the same time, just in Los Angeles. Because of this, the police began interviewing anyone with a history of sexual offences, and they did eventually interview Rodney, but ruled him out as the Hillside Strangler and let him go, not knowing that he was also a serial killer. Suddenly, a slew of murders hit the city, in addition to the ones which were already hitting the city. In November of '77, just weeks after Rodney had returned to LA, the body of 18-year-old Jill Barcombe was found dead on Mulholland Drive. I'm not sure what number she was. I remember she was pretty. She was very attractive. We talked for a while, and she seemed like she was enjoying my company and having fun in the conversation. Girls always enjoy my company. I remember looking at her pretty innocent face. I remember looking at her and thinking, I wish I could keep her that way. Forever. Five weeks later, 27-year-old Georgia Marie Wickstead was found dead in her Malibu apartment. Georgia was difficult. They're always more difficult when they're older. The young ones are better. They don't even understand what's happening until it's way too late. The older ones, they see it sooner. Still too late, but soon enough to be more of a problem. Georgia fought back. She struggled. It didn't save her, but it did make me angry. But for the first time in LA, the killer had left some physical evidence at the scene, a couple of DNA samples and a handprint. Another 5 months passed before Alcala would strike again, but in June of 1978, 32-year-old Charlotte Lee Lamb was found in the laundry room of her apartment complex. I knew they were never going to catch me. The police were slow. They kept confusing all the different crime scenes of different serial killers. They didn't know who killed who where. They picked me up multiple times, but I could always convince them that I was cool. The police liked me. They were 100 years behind me. The only way they could ever catch me is if I let them. Why did Rodney leave DNA everywhere like breadcrumbs to his identity? Why, it was 1978. DNA evidence didn't become widely used until the mid-80s, and while police had got into the habit of collecting DNA since the 60s or so, it was often done haphazardly, if at all, and the public had little to no knowledge of the fact that DNA could be used to prove a crime. So criminals didn't even know that they were leaving breadcrumbs. At this point, Rodney had abducted, molested, beaten, tortured, and murdered 7 confirmed victims spanning literally the entire country. And these are just the ones which had been confirmed. Most detectives agreed that his tally was much higher, with one detective even claiming that it's probably closer to 50 victims. This made him one of the most prolific serial killers of the 1970s. And unlike the as of at the time unknown other serial killers, Rodney was known to officials as he had twice been arrested for doing the things that he was doing. So it's at this point 7 murders and 2 convictions in, with his face on FBI wanted posters all over the country, that Rodney decided his best move was to appear on a very popular, nationally syndicated TV game show that had launched the careers of multiple celebrities whose executive may or may not have been a secret CIA agent. Rodney applied to appear on The Dating Game. And so, Cheryl strolled into her seat on the show, completely unaware that one of the mystery suitors was actually a man who enjoyed brutally torturing, assaulting, and murdering women, just like herself. And when you know who Rodney is and what he does, the show takes on a massively different context. It almost becomes sinister, like a game of cat and mouse, predator and prey.
Bachelor number 1.
Yes.
What's your best time?
The best time is at night, nighttime,
Why do you say that?
because that's the only time there is.
The only time? What's wrong with morning, afternoon?
Well, they're okay, but nighttime's when it really gets good.
From any other normal contestant on a normal show, this is just the kind of cheesy, playful riposte that you would expect on a show like this. But when you know that Rodney murders women in the nighttime, you know that this was him playing with his victim. This is also classic textbook serial killer behavior of both trying to appear smarter than the people around them, while simultaneously daring people to catch him. Backstage, one of the other suitors, called Jed Mills, had commented to the Wrangler that Alcala was incredibly strange and creepy and had given him very sinister vibes, something which the Wrangler agreed with. Oh, a Wrangler is an industry term. It's just a name for the crew member tasked with taking care of the talent on the TV show or the movie. But being weird and creepy isn't a crime. Despite Rodney's supposedly creepy aura and his somewhat dark answers to Cheryl's questions, when it came time to choose, she chose suitor number 1, the weird serial killer. During post-show work backstage, she had a few conversations with Rodney and started to feel uneasy about going on a date with him. She grabbed the Wrangler and asked if she was under any contractual obligation to go on the date with him. And the Wrangler said that he had similar concerns and that of course she didn't have to go on the date if she didn't want to. Cheryl never went on the date, and so she would never step outside on a dark night and meet the man who would later be dubbed the dating show killer. Six months after his appearance on the dating game, Rodney happened across a 15-year-old girl hitchhiking in Pasadena, named in court documents as Monique H. Monique was truly the one who got away. We had a great time together. I asked her to come to my house and we listened to some music and we talked a little about our favorite movies and our favorite restaurant dishes. We laughed. I flirted with her and she flirted with me. It was all kind of romantic. It really felt like we were made for each other. I like to take my dates to more secluded places, that's true. This makes the whole thing more intimate, more romantic. You'd really be surprised just how much a good location can really improve the photographs of your dates. What was uniquely different about his 15-year-old victim was that she too was accustomed to learning how to read people and tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. Maybe from a time living on the streets, it gives you a skill set of manipulating people as well. Instead of begging and pleading or threatening him, she pretended that she enjoyed it. She pretended that she liked him. She told him that they should go back to his apartment and continue it as an actual relationship. Rodney took her to his car and began driving them both home. When Rodney stopped for gas, Monique freed herself and ran away. When Monique escaped and ran away, that really hurt my feelings. Because I thought Monique and I had something special. The next day, police officers in Riverside County found Monique in the same beaten, dirty condition she'd been in the day before, and she was both hysterical and terrified. After getting her cleaned up and calmed down, she gave her story to the police and they picked up Rodney, at which point she positively identified Alcala as her attacker. They then arrested him and charged him with rape, kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. The following day, Rodney convinced his mother to pay his $10,000 bail. He then disappeared again. But the bodies just kept piling up. In the summer of 1979, Jill Marie Parenteau didn't turn up for work. Police entered her apartment and found her dead and naked on the bathroom floor. Like other victims, she had been repeatedly beaten, sexually assaulted before being strangled to death. The killer cut himself on a window when he had broken in, and police lifted a blood sample which matched some of the other crime scenes. One of Jill's friends later would give evidence to police that she had met Alcala in a club with Jill a few times before. A couple of weeks following this, 12-year-old Robin Samso was found in the LA foothills after being missing for 12 days. She'd been beaten, assaulted, and then stabbed to death before being dumped. Police spoke to her friends who said that a stranger had approached them on the beach recently asking to take their photo. When detectives circulated the photo of Rodney, his parole officer recognized him, and Rodney was then arrested again and held without bail. For the first time in his decade-long murder spree, he was finally seen for the monster he was by authorities and given no wiggle room to escape. It's both shocking and shameful that it took authorities 10 years and at least 7 dead women and girls to finally ignore Rodney's intelligence and superficial charm. Even Rodney's court cases never went as smoothly as a case of this magnitude should. His first conviction for Samsol's murder was overturned on appeal after the jury had been improperly informed of his prior sexual criminal record, and his defense team argued that it biased the jury against him. A second trial was then arranged, this time completely omitting the sexual criminal history, and again he was convicted and sentenced for the murder of 12-year-old Robin Samsol. Representing himself, Alkala filed an appeal against the new verdict, claiming that he'd been unlawfully detained originally when he was arrested after a supporting witness for his case was not allowed to testify to the fact that police investigators had hypnotized the park ranger who found Samsol's body. Believe me, I know how crazy it sounds, but the simple fact is that a park ranger was a compromised witness, and therefore my Fourth Amendment rights were not upheld when I was arrested. My Sixth Amendment rights were also violated. If the cops have hypnotized the park ranger into giving false testimony about me, and that false testimony was the basis of arrest, then there was no legal right to arrest me. And when they prevented my witness from giving testimony in court, they denied my right to a fair trial. He genuinely did argue that. The crazy part is the judge accepted the argument and overturned his second conviction because the witness genuinely had been prevented from testifying. So no matter how crazy his argument was, and it was absolutely insane, due process hadn't been followed. While preparing for a third trial, prosecutors realized that a new state law would allow them to collect DNA from Alkala, whether he agreed to it or not. So they collected samples of his DNA and matched it to the samples left behind at 4 of the murder sites from LA and New York in the 1970s. The prosecution then filed a petition to join the 4 new cases with the original Samsol case. Alkala and his defense team argued that it would prejudice the case, as reasonable doubt in one case is possible, but in 5 it would be impossible, and they would very likely find him guilty because of the similarity, especially when 4 of those 5 crime scenes had DNA matches to him. No shit. They really did try to say that it was unfair to include 4 cases where his DNA was a match because it would make the 5th case easier to convict. The judge said no and agreed to put all the cases together into one trial. Given that the MO was identical in each case, the defendant was in the area in each case, the defendant met every single victim, and the defendant's DNA was found at 4 of the 5 crime scenes. In what is one of the most bizarre defenses ever, Rodney acted as his own attorney and put himself on the stand, questioning himself and testifying for 5 hours. When he questioned himself, he put on a fake deep voice when pretending to be his own attorney and doing the questioning. He also only had one supporting witness, a psychiatrist who tried to argue that his BPD meant that he had no recollection of the murders and therefore could not be held accountable for them, an argument which persuaded absolutely nobody. Prosecution brought in Shapiro to testify against him, and ultimately her testimony plus the DNA evidence sank his case. Alkala was found guilty for a 3rd time, but this time he was found guilty of 5 murders and given the death sentence. They used the photos to try to look for connections with other missing persons cases. Some women did come forward to say that they were the person in the photo, and 8 families said that they knew the person in the photo and that those people had been missing for decades. The police also recovered various souvenirs of young boys and girls, some of whom had also been missing. The rest of the victims remain unidentified.